The men told her she was a fool the moment she laid her first log down across the icy bend in the river. They didn't ask why, didn't care what she planned. They just laughed, wagged their heads and said, "She'll learn fast when the thaw comes." And when she didn't answer, when she just kept working day after day, soaked to the knees with freezing river water, the laughter only grew louder. They joked about taking bets on how long it'd last. Some even brought their boys over to see the floating folly, as they called it. But she didn't build that cabin for them. She built it for her 3 children, her son Levi, and her twin girls, Ella and June. And when the freeze finally came, it was that same ridiculous river cabin that kept them alive, while others up the bank watched their roofs collapse under snow and their fires burn through the last of their wood. Her name was Martha Glenn, 36 years old, widow since last spring, when a barn beam took her husband's life during a storm. She didn't cry long. She had no time for grief, not with winter coming. They'd only just made it to the edge of the Colorado frontier in July, traveling alone by wagon after the rest of the train split at the Arkansas crossing. She was supposed to meet her cousin in the basin below Dry Creek Ridge, but there'd been no cousin when she arrived, just an empty patch of land, a rotted shed, and a bitter wind that already smelled like frost. That's when she'd seen the river. Not much more than 10 feet across, but moving strong and clear, winding down from the cliffs like a ribbon of glass, and beside it a raised bend with stones underfoot and a thicket of pine behind it, perfect for building, or so she thought. But no one builds on a river, not unless they're desperate or mad, and that winter, every settler west of Stonehook thought she was both. Martha drove the first stakes in August. The wood came from the trees. She cut herself with a dull saw and a broken hatchet Levi could barely lift. They slept under a canvas lean-to for the first 6 weeks. Wind tore through it nightly. One morning in September, she woke to a half-inch of frost on Ella's cheek and Levi coughing blood into his hands. Still, she built, laid 2 split pine trunks right over the shallows, notched and fitted as a base, their ends locked tight into the bankstone. Then more logs across those, each one fastened down by peg and ice-hardened rope. She sank clay and stone along the outer edges, made a skirt like a shield that curved down into the current. Some days she had to break ice just to drag in the next beam, and still the settlers mocked her. "She's digging her own grave," said one man in the general store. "Wait till January. That whole thing'll crack and drop her in the drink." "I give it 2 weeks," said another. "Bet she don't even make it to first snow." They were wrong. She made it through the snow, but not without cost. By mid-December, the storms hit, harder than even the old trappers predicted. The wind howled for 5 days straight, stripping bark from trees and freezing livestock in the fields. One settler, a man named Hayes, was found frozen stiff against his barn door, with the handle still in his hand. Half the cabins west of the ridge lost roofs. Chimneys collapsed. One family suffocated in their sleep when their stove smoke backed up into their loft. And still Martha's cabin stood, low, tight, quiet. The river had frozen at the edges, but the current still moved beneath, and her strange cabin sat just above it like a stubborn raft, anchored by frost and determination. Inside, it stayed warm, not from a miracle, but from what she'd done beneath the floor. The trick wasn't magic, it was air. She'd left a crawl space under the planks, shaped by the hollow between the log runners and the curved stone apron she'd sunk into the bank. And through that hollow, the river flowed slow but steady, not enough to flood, but enough to keep moving, enough to breathe, enough to pull cold out from the floor by circulation, water as her exhaust pipe, heat trapped above. She'd placed the stove dead center, raised just slightly, with a stone ring beneath it. It drew hard when the fire was lit, and above it, the entire cabin was lined with thick sod walls that she and the children had patched with pine pitch and wool scraps. Even the roof had an extra layer of canvas under the shingles, hand-stitched together from what was once her husband's coat and the last of their blankets. They didn't have much, but they had heat, and they had each other, until the night Levi disappeared. It was the second week of January. The snow outside was so deep it had swallowed the front steps. Martha had spent most of the day inside, tending the fire and trying to keep the girls from fighting. Levi had gone out early to chop wood, not far, just the ridge behind the pines where the last standing spruce still clung to needles. He'd taken the dog with him, but by sundown, neither had returned. She waited until dark, then longer. By the time she grabbed the lantern, the wind was howling again. She didn't wake the girls. She didn't want to scare them. Just pulled on her husband's old boots and took the sled rope in her hand, praying she wouldn't need to use it. She found the dog first, frozen, half buried under a drift. No blood, just stillness, as if it had laid down to wait for something. Then farther up the ridge, just where the trees thinned into stone, she found Levi's hat, then a glove, then drag marks in the snow. They weren't alone. Martha didn't scream. She didn't call. She lowered the lantern, scanned the trees, and listened. Nothing but the wind. But her hand didn't shake, not once. She turned, started back down the slope, then stopped. Something was moving, not behind her, but under. A sound, a creak, a shift in the trees. Not wind, not snow, something heavier. She didn't run, not yet. She waited, listened, watched, and then she saw it. Movement along the tree line. A figure, tall, heavy, dragging something. Levi. He was alive, but he wasn't alone. Something had him, and it was coming. She ran, dragged her son down that ridge with one arm, the lantern swinging wildly in the other. He wasn't speaking, just mumbling. His lips were blue, his boots gone, his leg was bleeding from the knee. Whatever had grabbed him had cut him deep, but he was alive, and she had to keep him that way. The thing in the trees didn't follow, but it watched. She felt it, all the way down the slope. The wind howled harder now. A full blizzard rising from the gorge, snow in sheets, trees bent sideways. She couldn't see more than 10 feet, but she knew the river, knew the way by heart. She dragged Levi across the bank, pulled him into the crawl space, up through the trapdoor under the stove. He moaned once, then fell quiet. The girls were awake, scared. She told them nothing, just lit the second fire, boiled water, wrapped his leg, and prayed. Outside, the storm hit harder than anything before, hard enough to shake the cabin frame, hard enough to collapse half the roofs in the western ridge. A barn fell into the creek. A man froze on horseback not 50 yards from town. But inside Martha's river cabin, the strange warmth held. The stove burned steady. The draft kept pulling. The river below, though crusted in parts, still flowed just enough to keep the air moving. And when the firelight flickered across Levi's face that night, she saw his eyes open. He was breathing, alive. But in those eyes was something else, something he couldn't say, not yet, something still out there, watching, waiting. Levi slept for 2 days. When he finally stirred, it wasn't with relief. It was with a cry, not a scream, but something stranger, lower, a sound like someone waking from a dream that had gone on too long. Martha was beside him in seconds. His eyes flicked open, cracked and red, his breath fogged in the dim space beneath the quilt. Though the stove still glowed hot across the room, he looked around as if unsure where he was, then locked onto her face with a look that wasn't comfort. It was confusion, then fear. "It pulled me," he whispered. "I didn't fall." "What pulled you?" she asked, brushing the iceburn from his brow. But he only shook his head. "The snow wasn't normal. It moved wrong." His words came slow, like each one cost him warmth. He said he'd gone up the ridge, past the tree line, where the last stand of pine opened into shale. He'd only meant to chop kindling, but he saw something. First a shape in the trees, then what looked like a man, tall, wrapped in furs, dragging something behind him. Levi thought it was an elk at first. He crept closer, hoping to get a better look, maybe even help, but then the man turned. "He wasn't wearing furs," Levi said. Martha frowned. "Then what was it?" Levi paused. "It was made of furs, all stitched together, faces, skins, hoods that weren't right." The dog had growled once, then ran. Levi said he should have done the same, but he froze. The man, or thing, didn't walk like a person. It shuffled, like it was dragging something too heavy for its body. It didn't look up, just kept coming. Then there was a flash. Something metal, bone, he wasn't sure. Just pain, then snow, then darkness. When he woke, he was on a slope, alone, half his coat missing, his boots gone, the snow around him disturbed, as if something had carried him and dropped him there. "It knew," he whispered. "It knew where I was going. It wanted me to go home." That night, Martha barred the cabin trapdoor with a crossbeam. She'd never used it before. It was a final defense, a thick oak post meant to lock the opening from below. She'd cut it the first week of building, never thinking she'd need it. But now it slid into place with a sharp finality. She didn't sleep, just sat by the stove, holding the axe, eyes fixed on the plank floor, listening. Nothing came, not that night, not the next. But the storm didn't stop either. Outside, the world had vanished beneath white. The river swelled, then narrowed, but never froze solid. That's what saved them. The heat that passed beneath, rising just enough through the floor to keep the cold from creeping in. Every other settler in the valley was burning furniture or tearing up shingles to survive. Some had fled downhill, hoping for rescue. Others barricaded themselves in root cellars that now filled with smoke and mold. But the Glen cabin held. Every morning, Martha swept snow off the upper hatch. The wind had packed it thick against the roof. The canvas seams still held. The wool-insulated walls still trapped warmth. The girls stayed in bed most of the time, bundled under every quilt they owned, while Martha took shifts stoking the fire and tending to Levi's wound. It wasn't infected, but it looked wrong, almost like a burn, the edges too black, the center too raw. She wrapped it in boiled cloth soaked with pine sap. Levi didn't cry, but every time she touched it, his face went pale. 3 days later, the sound came, not from above, from below. It was late, The girls were asleep. Levi was dozing. Martha had just finished the fire when she heard it. A thud, not loud but precise, not ice-breaking, not wood-shifting. This was closer, beneath the floor. She pressed her ear to the plank, waited. Another sound, scraping, slow. She moved to the trapdoor. It hadn't shifted. Still locked tight. She crouched, listening. Silence. Then a whisper. Not a voice. Not clear. Just breath. Right on the other side of the wood. Then silence again. She didn't sleep that night either. By morning, the snow had buried the hatch again. She didn't tell the children, but she kept the axe close, and that day she noticed the river below had changed color slightly. The edge of the ice no longer shone blue. It was tinged darker, not mud, not soot, something heavier. That night, Levi spoke again, this time in sleep. He said words she didn't understand, not nonsense, but not English, not German, something old, something cold. She tried waking him, but he wouldn't stir, just kept mumbling in that tongue. Then suddenly he sat up, eyes wide, staring past her. "It's in the river," he whispered. Martha turned. There was nothing, just the floor, but Levi's eyes were fixed, not blinking. "It sees us." He collapsed again into the blankets. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. That night, the trapdoor creaked. Once, then again. She held her breath, axe raised, but it didn't open, only pressed. From beneath, like something was testing it, feeling, smelling. Then it stopped. The next morning the river smoked, not with fog, but steam, faint, barely visible, like the water was warmer than the air above it. She knew it wasn't possible. The stove hadn't burned high enough for that. And still, by midday, Martha decided they couldn't stay. She packed a sled, wrapped Levi's leg tight, bundled the girls in every layer they had. They'd go downriver, toward town. If the pass was clear, maybe they'd make it to Miller's Bend. Maybe someone there had a horse or a stove with more wood. She knew the risks, but she also knew what she'd heard beneath that trap door. As they stepped into the snow, the cabin behind them groaned, not from the wind, from within. A deep sound, almost like disappointment. Levi looked back once. "It's waiting," he whispered. They made it a quarter-mile before the storm hit harder, too hard. Snow in sheets, white from every direction. She couldn't see the river, couldn't feel her own hands. The girls were crying. Levi was limp. Then the sled tipped, spilled him sideways. His leg struck ice. He screamed. They couldn't move him. Not far, not fast enough. They were going to die there, on the edge of the frozen river, until the groan came again. This time, from behind. They turned. The cabin, still standing, still warm. Martha didn't hesitate. She dragged Levi back. The girls behind her. The storm rose. The world vanished. But somehow, they made it, back into the hollow beneath the cabin, up through the trapdoor, back inside. And when she barred the door again, the wind stopped, not outside, in her chest. Because as the hatch sealed shut, she realized something else. The heat wasn't coming from the stove anymore. It was coming from the floor. The river had changed. It was warm, too warm. And beneath the boards, something stirred, not to break in, but to wait, patient, purposeful. They were safe, but only for now, only while they stayed, only while they remained in the cabin they had mocked. The floor pulsed beneath them, not like breath, not truly, but like pressure, a rising, ebbing warmth that didn't come from fire or stove or stone, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere that moved in rhythm with nothing natural. Martha felt it most at night. The floorboards would groan with a strange softness, as if stretched from below. The girls would sleep through it, but Levi never did. He'd lie still as stone, staring up at the sod ceiling with eyes wide, whispering again in that language he hadn't known weeks before. At first, she thought it was fever dreams, trauma, but the words were too consistent. Repeated phrases, patterns, chants. She began writing them down with charcoal on the inside of the pantry door. By the fourth night, he spoke them in his sleep with perfect cadence, like a prayer. And on the fifth night, the river itself began to whisper back, not in words, but in sounds. Whispers rising through the trapdoor slats like vapor. Dry and thin, almost like cracking leaves or frozen twine pulled taut, then plucked. It came always in the darkest hours, when even the embers faded and only silence remained in the tiny cabin. A voice, impossible, ethereal, began echoing faintly through the floor. Martha didn't tell the girls, but she stopped sleeping altogether. She took to keeping the axe in her hands at all hours. She stopped burning wood at night and let the cabin dim just enough to see without casting shadows. Heat no longer seemed necessary. The river took care of it, not with flame or flow, but something else. The warmth that pulsed now came in soft waves through the floor, steady and dry, like air rising through a lung too old to breathe, but too ancient to stop trying. It was wrong, and yet it kept them alive. Outside, the storm had worsened. No settler had come. no rider, no sign of aid. Martha figured the trail was gone, lost beneath drifts too thick for horse or sled. The mountains had closed. The path to Miller's Bend was buried. No smoke from any chimney could be seen even from the ridge. They were alone. And in that aloneness, the cabin began to change. The girls noticed it first. Ella said her bed was shaking, not from cold, but gently, like how a wagon shivers on rocky road. Then June whispered that she heard singing in the floor, like lullabies under the boards. Martha told them it was the wind, but wind didn't hum, nor did it follow rhythm. And when she crept down one night to press her ear to the trapdoor again, she didn't hear wind either. She heard breath, drawn and slow, long, controlled, as if whatever lay beneath the floor was sleeping or waiting. She opened the trapdoor only once after that. She had to see, had to know. The fire was low. The girls slept soundly. Levi, as usual, was awake, watching her, but he didn't speak. The door creaked upward, heavy and damp with frost, even from inside. And below, there was no snow, no ice. The crawl space beneath the cabin was clean, dry. Even the edges, which should have been packed with wind-blown drifts, were bare. The river moved still but slowly, thick like syrup, warmer than it should be, and the air that rose from it smelled, not of rot, not of death, but of old stone, like a cavern long buried, a mine sealed shut for generations. Earth smell, heavy, time-worn. And there was something else, a shape in the water, farther under the cabin, toward the midpoint, just past where her trapdoor light ended. A lump. It didn't move, but it glistened, like wet bone. She stared at it for too long, and then, from beneath, came a sound, not breath, not whisper, a single word, spoken in the same tongue Levi had been using. And Levi, upstairs, said it back, perfectly. Martha slammed the trapdoor shut, barred it, stuffed rags into the seams, piled wood atop it, but the words stayed in her ears, not like memory, like possession. From then on, she refused to let the girls near the floor. She kept them in the loft, sleeping above the stove, away from the planks that now seemed to bend when she walked. And Levi, she made him stay in the corner, nearest the front hatch. She would have sent him outside if she could have, but he was still too weak to stand. His wound had changed again. It no longer wept blood. It was dry now, grey, like ash. But his skin wasn't hot. It was cool, almost too cool, yet he didn't shiver. In fact, Levi never seemed cold anymore. Even barefoot, he stood at the window one morning, while Martha boiled snowmelt for tea. He watched the frozen river, watched it shift and crack in slow motion under its crust. "They're all gone," he whispered. Martha turned. "Who?" "The others. The ones on the ridge." "How do you know?" He didn't look at her. "They're inside now." "In what?" He looked at the floor, then walked away. She went out that day to check, left the girls with Levi, and hiked up the ridge as far as her legs would allow. The storm had lightened just enough to make movement possible. The world was ghost-white, featureless in every direction. The wind hummed soft now, no longer screaming, just low, like it was tired. She found no footprints, no smoke, no ash. No sign of life at all, except one thing, a totem, standing alone near the timberline, roughly her height, made of twisted pine and split bones, tied with strips of hide that looked too smooth to be animal, and at its center a knot of riverstone, set in a cradle of woven hair, human hair. She ran home, but when she reached the cabin, Levi was waiting at the door. "I told you," he said. "They're inside now." "Who is inside?" she asked, grabbing his shoulders. But he just blinked at her, then pointed at the trapdoor. Martha shoved past him, lifted the edge of the rags, laid her hand on the wood, cold, then hot, then pulsing, a beat, not fast, slow, deliberate, like a drum beat played by the earth itself. And in that rhythm, she understood. They hadn't survived the storm. They'd been chosen. The cabin hadn't been a mistake. The river hadn't been her folly. It had been a lure, a design, a vessel, built not by chance but by instinct, by some buried wisdom passed to her hands when she carved the first stake into the soil, when she laid those first 2 beams over the river. She hadn't known it then, but something had, something beneath. The settler men had laughed, mocked, scoffed, but they hadn't known the shape of the freeze to come, nor the shape of the thing that stirred beneath it. Only she had built with the river, instead of away from it. Only she had dared place her fire above its flow, and now only her cabin remained standing. The Glen children were the last, and the thing below knew it. It had spared them. For what? Martha didn't know. Not yet. But that night, when the girls awoke screaming from dreams of the man made of faces, and Levi rose from bed without flinching and walked to the trapdoor as if summoned, she knew something had reached a turning point. She stopped him with the axe, blocked his path. He stared at her blank. "You can't go down there," she said. "It's calling me. I know. You don't understand." "I don't have to." She raised the axe. He didn't move, but he didn't speak either. Behind them, The stove flared brighter than it had all week. A sudden burst. Too hot. She turned, then saw what was in it. Not wood, not ash, but something glowing. A shape in the coals. Circular, like a ring of bone, marked with runes she didn't know, but recognized. The same symbols Levi had spoken. The same etched shapes on the totem she'd found. The fire cracked. The girls screamed again from above. And outside, the storm returned in full. This time not with snow, but rain, freezing rain, slick and sharp, as if the sky itself was bleeding. She threw the axe into the hatch, barred it again, pulled Levi back, tied his hands, cried, then prayed, not to God, but to the river, to whatever it was beneath. She didn't know what else to do. The floor throbbed. The stove pulsed red, and the last night of the freeze had begun. There was no sunrise the next morning. The sky simply turned from pitch black to a pale, grim shade of blue, as if even the light had grown tired of pushing through snow. The air outside had changed. It no longer bit, it pressed, heavier than it should have been, the kind of weight that sank into bone and made a soul feel older just from breathing it in. And within that oppressive stillness, the Glen cabin trembled, not violently, not enough to knock a pot from its hook, but enough for Martha to feel it in her chest, in the nails, in the knots of wood where the beams met. The thing under the floor had stirred again, not just moving, turning. That morning, Martha found the stone circle in the stove glowing again, brighter now, not red but golden, like a coin fresh from the forge. She didn't dare touch it, just stared, as the air above it shimmered with heat that couldn't be explained by firewood alone. There were no coals left beneath it, only ash. The heat was coming from the stone itself. Levi watched from across the room. "It's ready," he said. She didn't answer. He stood, no limp, no groan of pain. His bandage hung loose, untouched. She realized with quiet horror that his wound had fully closed. But the skin wasn't skin anymore. It was a patch of grey-black membrane, like smooth bark, soaked in water and hardened by time. "Who are you?" she whispered. Levi's face twitched, not in anger, but something like grief. "I'm still your son," he said, "but I hear them now, and they hear me. What are they?" He looked at the floor. "They were here before us, before this land, before the tribes, before the rivers cut the hills. They slept beneath the veins of stone and waited, not dead, not gods, just waiting." "Why us?" He looked at her then. "Because you built it." "No, I didn't know. You didn't have to." Martha backed away. Levi didn't move. Behind her, the trapdoor pulsed again, and from within the cabin walls, faint vibrations began, like a humming, carried not by sound, but sensation. Ella and June stirred in the loft above, whispering. Martha could hear them even through the cabin hum. "Mama," Ella called down. "Someone's at the river." Martha ran to the hatch, lifted it. Nothing but snow and silence. But down by the bend, just within view, something was moving. A person, tall, wrapped in rags that fluttered without wind. It stood in the center of the frozen stream. The river hadn't fully iced over, but the spot beneath its feet was dry. No steam, no melt, just stillness. Martha stepped out into the freeze. She didn't feel the cold anymore, didn't care. She took the axe with her, her breath rising in clouds. The figure didn't move. It wore a veil, long, like animal hide, stripped and draped from crown to feet. The face beneath was hidden, but the shape of the body was not wrong, not deformed. It looked ordinary, familiar, and when she drew close enough, she realized why. The veil lifted in the wind just long enough for her to see the coat beneath. It was her husband's, the one she'd buried last spring, the same coat she'd torn into strips to insulate the roof weeks ago. This one was whole, clean, warm. Her voice cracked before she meant to speak. "Samuel?" No answer. Then, "Why?" Still nothing. And then its head tilted, the way Samuel used to when she'd ask him what he was thinking. Then finally it moved, but not forward. It bowed, a slow, reverent motion, and from the river beneath its feet, a glow rose, just like the stove. Same gold, same heat. Martha stepped back. The figure stood upright again, and when it did, she saw what was behind it. Others, more, not dozens, but enough. All dressed like settlers, some in clothes she recognized, others in pieces she'd seen weeks ago, hanging from hooks in the general store, faces half hidden, eyes black. They weren't alive, not really, but they weren't gone either, somewhere between the two, like the river. And then Levi's voice echoed from the cabin. "They want us to finish it." She turned. He stood at the hatch now, barefoot in the snow. "I told you," he said. "They spared us, because you built it." Martha backed away. "What did I build?" Levi walked closer. His feet left no prints. "A vessel," he said. "A mouth. For what? To let them return." "No," she shook her head. "No, that's not what I was doing. You thought you were building for survival, he said gently. You were. Just not the way you thought. Martha ran, back toward the cabin. She didn't look back, not even when the figure raised its arm, not even when the ground beneath the snow breathed. She slammed the hatch shut behind her, dragged the stove across it, then pulled the children close. They were both awake now, pale, but not afraid. They were calm, as if they already knew. You saw him, Ella said. Martha nodded. You saw the river move, June added. She nodded again. They said we're safe here, Ella whispered. No, Martha said sharply. You listen to me. We're not safe. We're being used. That river, it's not protecting us. It's feeding off us. It wants to become something. Levi sat on the floor, legs folded. They need your hands, Ma. I'll cut them off before I build a thing more. Not to build, he said, to open. The walls shuddered again, then cracked, thin fissures along the seams. A strange scent flooded the room, salt and stone and something like fresh blood, but older. Martha grabbed the girls, started tying blankets, readying the sled again. They'd run, even if it killed them. She'd burn the cabin behind her if she had to. But when she pulled the trapdoor open to reach the sled below, it was gone. The entire crawl space had changed. No longer hollow, no longer river. It was stone, polished, marked, lit from within by golden veins that pulsed like arteries. The river was no longer a river. It had risen, not in flood, but in form. The current now glowed from deep beneath the stone, like veins under flesh. And in the center of it all, directly beneath the cabin, a door, not wood, not iron, but bone, inlaid with runes, turning slowly, opening. A sound began to rise, not a scream, not even a song. A chant, thousands of voices, from under the river, from inside the wood, from the air itself. The cabin creaked, the beams shifted, and from the trapdoor floor, a hand reached up. The hand that rose through the trapdoor was not flesh, not anymore. Its shape was familiar, almost human. But where veins should have been, there were strands of glowing mineral, amber gold lines that shimmered like slow lightning under translucent skin. Its fingers were long, too long, and they didn't reach for anything. They simply rested on the floorboards, gently, as if testing, as if waiting for permission. Martha stood paralyzed. The girls clung to her, but they didn't scream. They stared with wide eyes, calm again, too calm. Their breathing matched the rhythm of the pulsing light beneath the floor. The cabin walls expanded and contracted ever so slightly, like lungs, like the building itself had become a living thing. And at its center, the door beneath the house, still opening. Levi stepped forward. The ropes that had once bound his hands lay slack behind him. He hadn't broken them. They'd simply fallen, like they no longer recognized him. His face was soft, but there was no boy in it anymore. No fear. No confusion, just purpose. He knelt beside the reaching hand and placed his palm against it. The moment contact was made, the river beneath them surged, not with water but with light. A wave of golden fire rushed through the floor, up the cabin walls, into the roof beams. The stove blazed like a forge reborn. The cabin let out a low groan, then grew silent. Every log, every board, every rope of wool, everything stopped moving. Stillness fell, and then the voice came, not through ears, but through everything. Martha felt it in her bones, in her skull, in the spaces behind her eyes, a presence older than time, with a voice not made of sound, but memory, as if every ancestor she'd ever had was speaking to her at once. You built what others would not. You gave shape to what could not return. Now you must choose. She stumbled backward, nearly falling into the girls. What choice? She gasped aloud, her throat dry as dust. Levi turned to her, and his eyes, those once blue eyes, were now gold. You can leave, he said with infinite calm. You can take the girls. Walk away. The river will part. The storm will end. No harm will come to you. You will live out your days in peace. And you? I stay. I finish what you started. Martha's voice cracked. Started what? A bridge. She stared at the floor, at the shifting door beneath them. A bridge to where? Levi's lips curled faintly, not in a smile, but in recognition. Not where? What? The chant rose louder, not cruel, not hungry, grateful, as if it had waited so long just to be acknowledged. Martha's mind raced. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It never had been. She had done what no other settler dared. She built with the river. She listened to it, laid logs upon it, trusted its unnatural warmth. And the river had responded, not with destruction, but with invitation. And now she stood at the edge of something beyond understanding. Why me? She asked. Why us? Levi answered without hesitation. Because they needed a mother. Martha's knees weakened. You think this is mercy? She whispered. You think what they've done is kindness? He nodded. They gave us warmth. They gave us shelter. They gave us you. I gave everything I had. You did, Levi said. And they saw that, and now they offer it back. Martha looked at the girls. Their eyes were still locked on the golden light beneath them. They weren't scared, but they weren't free either. They want the girls too, she said. Levi didn't answer. She stood tall again, drew herself up. No, she said. The hand twitched beneath the trapdoor. The light dimmed just slightly. The cabin moaned. They are mine, Martha growled. You hear me? You think because I was desperate, I'd give them to you? You think because I built where no man would build, that I did it for you? She stepped forward now. You're wrong. She grabbed the axe, the same one she'd raised against the snow, against death, against hunger. Now she raised it again, against the floor. Levi's mouth opened in warning, but she swung. The blade struck the trapdoor with a crack that echoed like thunder. Again, the hand withdrew. The light pulsed red, the chant turned sour, but she didn't stop. The wood split, the boards shattered, the axe blade bit into something deeper, a membrane that pulsed like flesh. She drove it in, and the cabin screamed, the whole building, the river below, the air itself, a deafening roar of pressure and pain, of rage and release. The stove exploded in sparks, the roof cracked, the ground lifted, Levi fell, the girls screamed finally. Martha dropped the axe and grabbed them both, dragging them toward the hatch. She kicked the upper door open. Snow and light and wind flooded in. The world outside was still stormed, but the storm had changed. It was reeling, as if the source of its power was suddenly gasping for breath. She hauled the girls through. The wind tore at them, but it didn't cut. The snow fell, but it didn't freeze. She turned once, just once, to look back at the cabin, and what she saw was not a home. It was a mouth. The cabin had split at its seams. The boards peeled like lips, the stove a tongue of flame, the trapdoor fully open now, and the shape beneath was rising, a face made of rivers, eyes of fire, arms of smoke. It saw her, and she defied it. She ran, down the bank, into the woods, through the ice, the girls in her arms. Levi did not follow. The cabin collapsed behind them, not with fire, but with light. A column of golden brightness shot upward, splitting the sky, turning the clouds to steam. And then, silence. For the first time in weeks, the wind stopped. The sky cleared, and the storm was gone. Martha collapsed beneath a tree, clutching her daughters. The river no longer glowed. It ran again, cold, dark, clear. The cabin was gone. Only a circle of scorched pine remained. No bodies, no bones, no sign of Levi. Only the faint, echoing hum of something disappointed, or perhaps freed. They walked for 3 days. Snow gave way to dirt, then stone, then the edge of the road. They were found by a trapper from Miller's Bend, who took them in without asking questions. Martha never spoke of what happened, never returned to the river. But when people asked how they survived the freeze of '81, she would always say the same thing. I built my cabin where no man dared, and she never explained why. Years later, after she'd grown old and grey, one of her grandsons returned to the place. There was no sign of the cabin, no sign of the river either, only dry stone. And in the center of the ground, a perfect circle of scorched earth. Within it, a single plank of wood, half buried in frost. On it, carved by hand, the bridge was not a mistake.